Maine, 1981. A cold case cracked, and the arrest shocks Portland. That is the headline, and it is real. The file sat for 4 decades. The answer came from a cigarette and a family tree. On March 4, 2025, Portland police arrested Raymond Ray Cottle, age 68. The charge is murder. The victim is Lisa Garland, age 22. Detectives say the mechanism was DNA, built not from a cheek swab in a file but from genetic genealogy, the same approach that changed how cold cases get solved. A single cigarette butt, sealed since 1981, gave up a single male profile. That profile led to distant cousins. Those cousins led to a surname. That surname led to a quiet man who never left the coast. The moment turned a street into a stage. A gull clung to a chimney cap and yelled into the wind. The salt air hung heavy. Phones rose like a small forest. Red record dots flashed through the mist. Officers guided Cottle down the front steps of a weathered gray house that faced Casco Bay. The siding was fish-scale old. The porch light had not been changed in years. He wore a sweatshirt and slippers. The cuffs looked loose at his wrists. He glanced once to the left, as if checking the tide. A retired detective stood back, near the end of the tape. He had chased this case for half his career. He did not blink as the cruiser door closed. He just breathed once, a long breath that looked like steam. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. The file on Lisa had weight, cardboard tape on the edges, a marker bleed that said, Garland, Lisa, Portland, 1981. Inside were black and white scene photos, notes in blue pen, and an evidence log that looked like a ledger from another era. The detail that mattered most sat in a small envelope that no one threw away. Item 12. Marlboro filter, wet. The officer who bagged it did not know future science. He only knew that cigarettes often belonged to someone who stood and watched. Back then, DNA was a rumor in a lab. The first tests in the mid-90s were partial, too broken, too few markers to compare. The lab wrote inconclusive. Funding was thin. The case went cold again. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you're in the right place. Years passed. Portland grew and changed. New brew pubs on old cobblestone, new condos where canneries once clanged. The file stayed in a climate room where the fan hummed. Every so often someone pulled it and tried a different angle. A composite sketch based on a vague witness, a letter to the editor that claimed a stranger with a scar, a review of men who left town that summer. Nothing held. Then came the new way, single nucleotide polymorphism, not just STRs, whole sets of markers across the genome. It was the difference between a thumbprint and a portrait. In 2023, the Maine State Police Cold Case Unit partnered with a private lab in Virginia. Verigen Analytics handled old evidence with white room care. Dr. Chloe Ramos led the extraction. She used an enzyme repair protocol to coax signal from the damaged cells on the cigarette. She spoke in precise lines: hydration, repair, amplify, sequence. The profile that emerged was male. Not a complete genome, but enough for a SNP-based upload to a public genealogy database that allows law enforcement searches with approval. The team followed policy and documented each step. Chain of custody read like a metronome. The first hits were faint. Distant cousins, Irish and French-Canadian branches, a few lines that led to mid-coast families around Boothbay and Damariscotta. The genealogist on the team built trees with the patience of a watchmaker. She matched centimorgans to family stories. She traced maiden names through church bulletins. She wrote down the same surname again and again. Cottle. Investigators ran the name against old city directories and union rolls from the wharf. They found a young Ray Cottle in 1981, listed as a deckhand and trap fixer. He worked yards from the diner where Lisa waited tables. He parked near the pier where her boyfriend kept an old skiff. He lived then in a room above a bait shop for a season. He left no fingerprint card. He left almost no paper at all. The cold case unit opened a quiet tale. It ran for months. Surveillance watched the ordinary. A stop for gas on Washington Avenue. A scratch-off ticket at a corner store. A coffee to go on a Sunday. They needed a fresh discard. They waited for him to toss something that would hold his cells. Late in February, an undercover officer retrieved a used coffee cup from the bed of his pickup. The cup had a faint ring of cream and a smear the color of tan. The lab put the swab beside the cigarette profile. The numbers lined up, not just close. It was a match within astronomical odds. The technician wrote the language that courts understand. The probability that a random person would share the same profile is lower than 1 in trillions. A single line in the case memo addressed the obvious defense. Could the cigarette have been innocent contact? The reply was simple. The cigarette was inches from the body in damp grass, collected within hours, sealed, and preserved. The fresh discard matched the scene profile 44 years later. 2 independent samples. Same man. Not chance. Not transfer. The district attorney approved an arrest plan. They picked a date, March 4th, a Tuesday, early, while the street was still empty. A neighbor in a blue parka watched from behind a storm door. A dog pressed its nose to the glass and fogged a round spot. The tide chart tacked by Cottle's back door showed low water at dawn. He did not get to check it. Body cameras recorded the approach. Knock. Police. He opened. He looked past the detective for half a second, like a man expecting a delivery that was late. He listened to the charge. He nodded once. He asked for shoes. They gave him time to put on boots with cracked leather. They led him down the steps. The gull lifted off the chimney and drew a white arc. Word spread faster than a siren. A local group text buzzed. Did you see the lights? Is that about the Back Cove girl? People who had moved away years ago received screenshots. In living rooms across the city, the name Lisa rose again like a tide. It had been a whisper for decades. It became a headline before breakfast. At the station, detectives went through the formalities that show respect for process. Fingerprints, photos, a rights card read in a steady voice. The public defender entered a not guilty plea at arraignment. The judge set a schedule. That is how a 44-year wait becomes a line on a calendar. The press room filled by noon. Tripods lined the wall. The district attorney stepped to the podium. She spoke with plain words. The cigarette was collected in 1981, thanks to a patrol officer who thought ahead. The lab used modern SNP sequencing. The genealogy work narrowed the pool. A discarded coffee cup provided confirmation. She repeated one thing twice. A small detail, collected right, can outlive time. Reporters asked about motive. There was no answer yet. No sign of robbery. No known intimate link. No confession. They have the who. The why remains blank. Lisa's sister answered the phone just after sunrise. The detective said, "We have a match." Emily sat down on the edge of her bed. The room was quiet. The words sounded large, as if they came from a stage. She asked for the detail that would make it real. The detective said, "The cigarette beside her shoes." Emily remembered it from an early article, a single line. She had once circled it in pen. She kept her sister's last voicemail on an old flip phone. She plugged it in once a year on the date Lisa died. She listened to a hello that ended with a laugh. She did that again that night, not to suffer, but to mark a change. The voice felt closer. In the old neighborhood, older residents shared a ritual memory. Back then, parents told their kids to call when they left work, to walk in pairs, to stick to light. It changed routines. It changed roots home. People kept small habits that lasted years. Mothers walked to the end of the block and waited at the same spot each dusk. Fathers checked the rear seat before they drove. A city adopts new reflexes when a young woman is taken. Those reflexes linger long after the tape comes down. The retired detective who once held the file watched the arrest from the sidewalk. He spoke quietly to a younger sergeant. He said, "We used to joke that the cigarette would solve it if science ever caught up." Then he corrected himself. Not a joke. A hope. He remembered nights in the 1990s when he sat under a green desk lamp and tried to trace men who left town in the fall. He remembered calling a lab in Boston and asking about a new test with a strange name. He remembered being told that the sample was too far gone. He tried not to think of the report that said inconclusive in all caps. After the arrest, tips poured in. People recalled a boat that broke moorings that summer, a bar argument 2 streets from the diner, a rumor about a man who smoked red packs and liked to walk late. Detectives logged each one. They know that new truth arrives wrapped in old noise. They also know that one call can add a missing minute to a timeline. The cold case unit drew a clean line on a whiteboard. Time on one axis, place on the other. Pins marked Lisa's last shift, the walk toward the bus stop, the route past the wharf. Another pin marked where her body was found, near Back Cove, close to the waterline where eelgrass lies flat at low tide. They added a pin for the cigarette. They overlaid Cottle's 1981 work hours, drawn from a payroll ledger that had a faint grease stain at the corner, lines crossed. It is not proof by itself. It is context that gives DNA a map. They also pulled boxes on other women from that era, not to paint with a broad brush, to check for echoes, to see if the same profile touched another file. No one said serial. No one speculated at a podium. They simply checked. That is what you do when you put a name to a profile after this much time. A defense path was obvious. Attack preservation, mention storage, suggest contamination. The state prepared answers before the first motion. The envelope seal from 1981 was intact. The chain logs had no gaps. The storage unit kept steady cold. The lab ran controls and blanks for each step. The genealogy upload used permitted databases with proper consent flags. The confirmatory discard came from a cup collected under observation, bagged immediately, and tested in isolation. The story was not one sample. It was 2 samples that matched across decades, backed by process that a jury can follow. The arrest sent a shiver through the working waterfront. People who coil rope for a living do not spook easy. They did now. The idea that a man who tuned traps and patched lines might carry this kind of secret felt like a crack in familiar wood. Crews talked in tight circles on the pier. They kept their voices low. They looked at the house that faced the bay and wondered what else had been on the porch all those years. In living rooms, families pulled out photo boxes. Someone remembered a summer picture from a wharf party where a young man who looked like Ray stood near the edge of the frame. People studied the background more than the faces. They looked at who turned away. They looked at who smoked. They looked at who held matches. That is what a town does when a cold case breaks open. It replays. It rewinds. It tries to fix a focus that never existed. By late afternoon, rain moved in from the bay. The arrest tape came down. The porch light still worked and cast a weak cone on wet steps. A few wilted weeds lay pressed flat against the clapboards. The detective who first bagged the cigarette in 1981 was not there. He had moved south years ago. He received a call from a friend in the unit and sat in his kitchen with the phone on speaker. He listened to the update, then laughed once, a sound that was half joy and half relief. He said only 2 words. "Thank you." The district attorney gave one more line to the press as the day closed. She said, "This case will not try in the media." Then, she added a thing that mattered to the family. Lisa is not a file number. She is a person. The team will speak her name in court. Some cases change over time because evidence fades. This case changed because evidence stayed. A Marlboro filter, a bead of saliva that clung to paper 44 winters ago. A label in block letters from a hand that believed in saving small things. That is the thread that ran from 1981 to this morning. Not a miracle. A decision to collect. A choice to preserve. Portland slept lighter that night, but it slept. The tide turned just before dawn. Somewhere, a porch chair creaked in a gust. Somewhere, a sister set down an old flip phone and exhaled. The arrest is not the end. There will be motions. There will be expert reports and hearing dates, and a jury that will sit through diagrams and charts. There will be a calendar with circles in red. There will be stories that surface now that a name is public. There will be a defense that pushes every edge of doubt. That is how this works. It must work that way. Justice without friction is not justice. It is a show. For now, the headline holds. Maine, 1981, cold case cracked. Arrest shocks Portland. A cigarette and a genome did what rumor and fear could not. They gave the case a shape. They gave the city a day to remember for more than grief. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. Before her name became a headline, Lisa Garland was known for 2 things in Portland: her laugh and the sketchbook she carried everywhere. She was 22 in the summer of 1981. Brown hair, cut short for the heat, and a habit of pushing it behind her ear when she worked. She waited tables at the Harbor Light Diner on Commercial Street, 2 blocks from the piers, and took art classes at the community college 3 nights a week. Portland then was a working harbor, a mix of diesel, salt, and coffee. The air smelled like bait shops and bread from the Italian bakery near the corner. You could still find fishermen repairing nets beside brand new tourists who had come north looking for quiet. Rent was cheap. Life was small but steady. Lisa rented an attic apartment above a shoe repair shop on York Street. One window faced the harbor, the other faced the alley. She filled both sills with jars of paintbrushes and tiny glass bottles that caught the light in the afternoons. The walls were crowded with sketches, faces of customers she served, boats from memory, and rough charcoal outlines of city streets. Her favorite was a simple one: 2 girls walking near Back Cove at dusk. One held a sketchbook, the other carried a coffee. You could almost feel the air between them. Neighbors remembered her as polite but always in motion. The man who ran the shoe shop said he often heard music upstairs, usually jazz or something soft enough to blend with the hum of the traffic outside. She'd wave each morning, balancing a to-go cup in her bag, heading downhill toward the diner. The harbor light sat near the ferry terminal, long counter, red stools, chrome napkin holders. The kind of place where everyone ordered the same thing each day, and the cook didn't need to ask how you liked your eggs. Lisa worked the afternoon to close shift, 4 to midnight. She was good at it, remembered names, remembered orders, and never lost her calm even when the late crowd pushed the line. The regulars were dock workers, ferry crews, and college students looking for cheap coffee. One of them was a young man named Tom Whitaker, who played guitar at bars around town. He and Lisa started dating that summer. It wasn't serious, not yet. They'd go for walks near the pier after her shift, sometimes sit on the seawall and sketch the lights on the water. Friends said she talked about wanting to move south someday, maybe to Boston, to try for an art program. Everything about her life looked ordinary, the kind of ordinary that hides tragedy until it hits. That Friday, July 10th, 1981, the day started like the others. Warm air off the bay, bright sun. Her roommate, a college student named Karen Doyle, said Lisa left for work around 3:15, wearing jeans and a white blouse. She'd tied her hair back with a red band. She carried her sketchbook, as always, and a denim jacket in case the evening turned cool. The diner's log showed she clocked in at 3:30. Business was slow early, then steady through the dinner rush. Around 9, she served coffee to a table of men from the wharf, one of them later identified as Ray Cottle. The waitress on the next shift remembered him because he asked for a refill even after paying the check. He'd been sitting alone, chain-smoking, watching the street through the window. At 11:45, Lisa started her side work, wiping tables, filling napkin holders, checking the pie case. The cook, a man named Leo, saw her glance at her watch around midnight. The bus she usually caught left from Congress Street at 12:15. He waved as she headed out the door. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Back then, Commercial Street after midnight was quiet but not empty. Bars closed late, fishermen prepped early runs, taxis prowled for fares. The security guard at the ferry lot said he saw a young woman matching her description walking east toward India Street. He thought she looked distracted, maybe tired. She was alone. The walk from the diner to her apartment took 15 minutes. That night, she never made it home. By sunrise, her roommate realized something was wrong. Lisa's bed hadn't been slept in. Her jacket was still missing. The sketchbook was gone too. Karen called the diner. They said she'd left on time. She called Lisa's parents in Yarmouth, then the police. At first, officers treated it as a possible runaway or late-night detour, but by afternoon, her handbag was found near Back Cove, halfway between the diner and her apartment. It was lying in the grass off a service road, the strap broken, wallet inside, cash still there. The only thing missing was her sketchbook. Detectives canvassed the area, asked about cars parked near the cove after midnight. A few joggers remembered seeing a dark pickup, older model, parked near the trailhead. No one caught the plate. By Sunday, the search turned official. Dozens of volunteers combed the shoreline. The tide was low. They found nothing the first day. On the second, around 7 in the morning, a firefighter spotted what he thought was a drifted tarp near the water's edge. It wasn't. Lisa's body lay partially hidden by reeds, face turned toward the bay. The medical examiner later estimated time of death between midnight and 2 a.m. Cause: blunt force trauma, no sign of robbery. No sexual assault, just violence, clean and sudden. The cigarette lay a few feet from her shoes. Detectives logged it without ceremony, one of many small pieces of debris. They didn't know yet that it would outlast all the rest. News spread fast. The next morning's paper ran the story on page 1. Yarmouth woman found dead near Back Cove. The city reacted like it had been cut. Fear settled over the waterfront. Women who worked night shifts started walking in groups. The diner put in brighter lights and new locks on the back door. Lisa's funeral filled the small church in Yarmouth. Her art professors attended, carrying portfolios of her work. the local paper printed one of her sketches in black and white. The caption read, "The Bay at Dusk, Artist Unknown." For the Garland family, grief became a long routine. Her parents closed her room but never packed it. Her sister Emily visited once a week to dust and water the plants that still sat on the sill. They never died. She said the light in that room always felt different, softer, like the air held her sister's breath. Years turned to decades. The city changed. The shoe shop closed. The harbor light became a bar, then a breakfast cafe, then closed again. Lisa's story moved from news to legend, the girl from the cove, the one they never caught. Parents told her story to teenagers the way you tell a warning. Don't walk home alone. Don't trust a ride. Don't ignore your instincts. Every anniversary, Emily drove to Back Cove at dawn and placed a jar of paintbrushes by the water. She'd stand for a few minutes, looking at the tide. Then she'd leave before the sun rose too high. Detectives cycled through the case, some veterans, some new. They reviewed the evidence, looked at old suspects, interviewed old boyfriends, drifters, ex-sailors. Nothing fit. Each theory ended the same: a line through a name, a note that read no evidence connecting. One small twist surfaced in the mid-90s, when a man arrested for burglary claimed to know who killed Lisa Garland. He said it was a fisherman who drank at the Wharf Tavern and bragged once about a girl he hurt. Investigators checked. The man he named had died in 1986. His fingerprints didn't match anything at the scene. Another dead end. By the time DNA testing became routine, the evidence looked too degraded to help. The lab tried twice, with early kits. Each time, the result came back partial. No match, no closure. Then, the cigarette, that simple, wet Marlboro filter sealed in an old evidence bag, survived just enough. When the cold case unit reopened the file in 2023, it looked almost trivial on paper. But to a forensic tech, even one cell can matter. They logged it into the new chain, signed it over to Verigen Analytics, and the slow work of science began. What the public didn't know was that for all the years of silence, Lisa's family never stopped pressing. Emily sent letters to every new governor, every attorney general, each one polite, never bitter. Just a single sentence at the end: please test again when you can. When the call finally came 44 years later, she was the one they called first. The Portland of 2025 is not the same city Lisa knew. The skyline is taller, the harbor is cleaner. But on the night the news broke, something familiar returned, a hush that fell over the waterfront, as people realized the name they'd grown up hearing now had an answer. The mayor called it closure. The old detectives called it justice. Emily called it a start. She told reporters she'd always believed science would catch up. That's why she never threw away the clipping from the first article. It stayed folded in her wallet for decades, worn at the edges, the ink almost gone. The next morning, someone left a small sketchbook on the church steps in Yarmouth. No note, just the initials L.G. in pencil on the back cover. Inside were quick drawings: the diner, the harbor, the same curve of Back Cove. Investigators took it into evidence. The paper was aged, the graphite faint, the pages brittle. They couldn't tell who left it. That's where the story begins to turn from the ordinary life of a girl in a harbor city to the extraordinary reach of a clue that waited half a lifetime to speak. Because Lisa's story is not only about a murder and a match, it's about how a town carries a wound quietly until the day it's reopened, and how memory, like evidence, can outlast the people who made it. Friday, July 10th, 1981. The morning started with heat already rising off the harbor. Lisa Garland woke before her alarm. The attic room smelled faintly of turpentine and toast from the bakery downstairs. A gull shrieked outside, then another answered. She sat up, tied her hair, and watched a thin beam of light slide across the sketch, pinned to the wall, a half-finished study of the ferry terminal, graphite smudged where she'd rubbed at the shading. She boiled water for coffee, painted her nails clear, and flipped through the small notebook she kept near the window. On the top page, she'd written a list. Pick up film from pharmacy. Call Mom about Sunday dinner. Ask Leo for extra shift next week. Finish Back Cove drawing. Routine. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looked like an ending. She left her apartment at 3:15. The shoe repairman waved from his doorway. He remembered the denim jacket slung over her arm and the red band in her hair. The sun hit the glass jars on her windowsill, throwing colored dots on the sidewalk behind her. He watched her turn the corner toward York Street, and vanish into the crowd. Downtown Portland on a Friday in 1981 had its own rhythm. Delivery trucks rattled over cobblestones. The ferry horn blew twice. Radios leaked out open doors. Springsteen, Blondie, a Red Sox game fading in and out of static. The air smelled of diesel, seaweed, and fried clams. Lisa caught the number 5 bus down to Commercial Street. She took the back seat and opened her sketchbook. A woman sitting nearby remembered later that she was drawing the harbor skyline while the bus bounced over the bricks. She never looked up, the woman said, like she was racing the light. At the diner, she clocked in at 3:30. The time card machine stamped the date in purple ink. The cook, Leo Bennett, flipped a switch on the radio and shouted, "Morning, Picasso." She laughed. "Afternoon, Leo. It's already 3. Her first customers were a pair of ferry deckhands grabbing coffee before the next run. She knew their order by heart: eggs over, extra toast, one with no butter. The tip was 2 quarters stacked on the counter. She slid them into her apron pocket without looking. From 3 to 6, the rush never stopped. Truckers, tourists, a group of high school kids who filled the booth near the door. She moved fast, steady, with a kind of practiced rhythm that made it look easy. At 6:15, she called her sister from the payphone by the kitchen to say she'd be up in Yarmouth on Sunday. The call lasted less than a minute. Emily remembered hearing laughter in the background, a radio, a jukebox, maybe both. After 7, the dinner crowd thinned. The heat outside broke as fog rolled in from the bay. Lisa wiped down the counter and poured herself a coffee. A fisherman she knew slightly, Ray Cottle, sat at a booth near the window. He'd been in before, always alone, always ordering the same, chowder and coffee. He nodded when she poured the refill. "Late night?" she asked. "Early one," he said. His voice was rough from smoke. He smiled once, then looked out the window at the pier lights. Nothing about the moment stood out. Not then. At 10:30, her friend Karen stopped by for pie. Karen said later Lisa seemed distracted, glancing at the clock every few minutes. She talked about saving for a trip to Boston. She said she wanted to see a museum exhibit that was closing soon. She kept rubbing her wrist, Karen recalled, like she was nervous about something, but she didn't say what. By 11:45, only a handful of customers remained. The jukebox clicked through a slow country song. Leo finished cleaning the grill. Lisa counted her tips, $9 and change, and wrote the total in a small spiral notebook she kept in her apron. She told Leo good night, grabbed her bag, and stepped out into the warm, damp air. Security footage didn't exist then. The only record is what people remembered. A cab driver waiting near the ferry terminal saw a young woman walking east, white blouse, jeans, sketchbook tucked under one arm. She paused at the corner, checking traffic. He thought she looked tired but calm. A security guard at the ferry lot remembered a truck idling near the curb, older Ford, maybe blue, maybe green. The driver smoked, flicking ashes out the window. He noticed the same woman walk past but didn't see her speak to the driver. At 12:10, the bus she usually took rumbled by. She wasn't on it. The next confirmed sighting came from a night shift dock worker finishing at a warehouse by India Street. He told detectives he heard a short shout, not a scream, more like surprise followed by the slam of a car door. He thought it was a couple arguing. He didn't check. After that, Portland slept. Sometime between midnight and 2, Lisa died near Back Cove. The medical examiner later determined she fought bruises on her forearms, skin under her nails. She had tried. But against a larger man, alone, it hadn't mattered. Morning came cold. A jogger found her at 7:12, partly hidden by reeds. Police arrived by 7:25. The first report went out at 8. Detective Robert Kinney wrote in his notebook, "Female, early 20s, no ID, possible homicide, area cordoned off." A patrol officer flagged a cigarette a few feet away. Kinney told him to bag it, just in case. The officer slipped on gloves, used tweezers, and dropped it into a small paper envelope. The seal read, "Item 12, Marlboro filter, wet." The handwriting slanted slightly to the left. By noon, her identity was confirmed through her driver's license, found in the purse recovered along the path. Word spread through the department fast. Someone called the diner. Someone else drove to York Street to tell her roommate. Karen Doyle opened the door still in her bathrobe. She already knew. She didn't come home, she said before they even spoke. Detectives worked the day in tight circles. They canvassed the diner, the bus stop, the ferry lot. They questioned anyone who'd been there past 11. They took statements, typed on carbon paper, every page stamped with the same case number. Most led nowhere. A few offered fragments. The bartender from the Wharf Tavern said Ray Cottle had left the bar around 11:30 that night. Quiet, sober, just headed out. A mechanic who worked near the docks claimed he saw the same truck, old Ford, dented fender, parked by the service road around midnight. No license plate. No one thought to memorize it. That night, Portland police officers searched Back Cove again with flashlights, combing grass and mud until the beams cut through fog. They marked footprints, tire tracks, and one broken bottle. The tide was rising, erasing what little remained. The detective in charge wrote later that it felt like chasing a ghost made of water. Lisa's family arrived from Yarmouth the next morning. Her father met with detectives in the squad room, a fisherman himself, used to the calm speech of men who measure facts by weight. He listened without interrupting. When they finished, he said one thing: find out who. That day became the pivot point for the city. Before July 10th, Portland felt safe. After, it didn't. Women who worked night shifts at the cannery began traveling in pairs. Bars put up posters offering rides home. Parents formed informal patrols near the bus stops. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves like a tide under the surface. Detectives followed every lead: dock workers, drifters, tourists, ex-boyfriends. The man named Ray Cottle appeared once in their notes, interviewed briefly, alibi not solid but not disproved. He told them he'd been home before midnight. No evidence said otherwise. They let him go. His name disappeared into the file like ink fading in sun. Weeks later, the newspapers moved on. The front page carried other headlines: budget meetings, storms, elections. Lisa's case dropped to column 3. But the people who knew her didn't forget. Leo left her name written in chalk on the back of the diner's storage door. He never erased it. Karen moved out of the apartment but kept one of Lisa's sketches: 2 girls walking by the cove framed above her kitchen table. Emily wrote letters to police chiefs every few years, each one ending the same way: please test again when you can. 44 years later, someone finally did. The last normal day of Lisa Garland's life was full of small, ordinary moments that later turned sacred. A refill of coffee. A smile at a customer. A sketch drawn on a bus. A walk under yellow streetlights. Nothing warned her. Nothing stopped him. And yet, every trace she left: the note, the drawing, the cigarette beside her shoes, waited patiently for science to learn their language. It would take 4 decades for anyone to understand what they'd been saying all along. The fog that morning rolled in from the bay like smoke, thick and slow. It muffled sound and smell, turning the waterfront gray. The tide was still receding when the jogger found her. Her name was Susan Larkin, 31, a nurse at Mercy Hospital who ran the Back Cove Trail before every shift. She'd taken that route for years, the same bend, the same rhythm, the same distant hum of gulls over the water. She said later that something looked wrong with the reeds. At 7:12, she saw the outline. At 7:14, she realized what it was. She froze. Then she screamed. A patrol unit reached the scene at 7:25. 2 officers, both in their 20s, both knew enough that they'd never handled a homicide. They saw the body first, a young woman lying face down near the waterline, one arm extended, her jeans damp from the tide. Her shoes were off, placed neatly together. The area was quiet except for the ripple of water and the buzz of insects in the grass. The officers called it in. Their voices on the radio cracked once. Within an hour, Back Cove looked like another world. Yellow tape cordoned off a 100-foot radius. Uniforms lined the trail. The city's medical examiner, Dr. Leonard Price, crouched beside the body with gloved hands. He spoke low, mostly to himself, recording details into a handheld tape machine. Female, early 20s, time of death, approximately 6 to 8 hours ago. Blunt force trauma, no signs of robbery. He paused. There's a cigarette filter near the shoes. Bag it. A patrolman pulled on fresh gloves, used tweezers, and placed the small Marlboro filter into a paper envelope. He marked it with a black pen. Item 12, near victim's shoes. Wet. The ink bled slightly in the fog. He initialed it. That tiny act, almost automatic, would turn out to be the most important thing done that day. Detective Robert Kinney arrived at 8:30. He'd been on the force 12 years, a serious man with wireframe glasses and a slow way of speaking that made people tell him things. He took one long look at the scene and knew this wasn't random. The neat placement of the shoes, the missing sketchbook, the lack of sexual assault, it felt deliberate. He told the younger officers to expand the perimeter. If you think you've gone far enough, go farther. They found Lisa's handbag about 30 feet up the path, strap torn, wallet still inside. A bus ticket was tucked between the bills, 1215, Congress Street line, dated July 10th. At 10, the sun burned off some of the fog. Reporters began to gather behind the tape. Portland hadn't seen a murder like this in years. The city was small enough that everyone felt close to it. The photographers shot long-lens images across the tape line. The reeds, the patrol cars, the glint of the water. None would be printed in color. The papers thought that would be too much. By 11:30, the scene was cleared enough for transport. The stretcher wheels left twin tracks in the wet soil. A few feet away, Detective Kinney bent to pick up a page half buried in mud. It was torn from a spiral notebook, a quick sketch of the cove done in pencil, smudged but still visible. He slipped it into an evidence bag without a word. At the station, they worked the board. Victim, Lisa Garland, age 22. Time of death, between midnight and 2. Location, Back Cove Trail. Cause, blunt trauma. Possible weapon, unknown. Motive, undetermined. No witnesses, no footprints clear enough for casts, no tire impressions that survived the dew. The path was gravel and sand, impossible to hold detail. That afternoon, detectives drove to York Street to notify next of kin. Karen Doyle opened the door, eyes swollen, still holding the phone she'd used to call police hours earlier. She saw the badges and stepped aside. "Is it her?" she asked. They didn't need to answer. Inside the small apartment, the air was still heavy with turpentine and coffee. The officers looked around carefully. Her bed was unmade. A half-finished painting leaned against the wall. They collected what they could: hairbrush, toothbrush, a few letters, the receipt from the pharmacy. Kinney noticed the empty space on the shelf where a sketchbook would fit. She always carried it? Karen nodded. He wrote in his notes, "Sketchbook, missing possible significance." At the diner, customers stood in silence as police came to question staff. Leo Bennett, the cook, leaned against the counter, wiping his hands on a towel he didn't need. "She left right on time," he said. "Midnight sharp. Said she'd see me Monday. I never even—" He stopped. The waitress on the next shift, Denise Hall, told them about the man sitting alone near the window, the one who smoked the whole time. He paid with cash, didn't talk much, drove off in a pickup, I think. Older Ford, blue. She couldn't recall the plate number. That name Cottle first appeared in her written statement. Ray Cottle, used to come in sometimes. Kinney underlined it twice. By evening, the case had a rhythm: collect, question, map. They charted Lisa's final walk on a city map pinned to the wall. Red string connected the diner, the bus stop, the cove. Between the 2 points was darkness, no cameras, no witnesses, just a 15-minute walk that became a void. Reporters crowded outside headquarters by sunset. The police commissioner gave a short statement. "We are treating this as a homicide. We urge anyone with information to contact the department." He didn't take questions. That night, the city changed in small, visible ways. Restaurants closed earlier. Women started sharing rides home. The paper ran editorials about safety lights along the waterfront. Fear was a new language, and everyone learned it fast. Inside the department, the investigation expanded. Officers canvassed every bar within a mile. They questioned ferry crews, truck drivers, night shift workers. They even checked the ferry logs to see if any out-of-town visitors left early that morning. One lead came from a cab driver who worked the midnight shift. He said he'd seen a man sitting in a parked pickup near the bus stop around 12:10. Engine running, window down, cigarette smoke, watching the street. He couldn't describe the man's face, only the outline, the shape of the shoulders, the glow of the cigarette. The description matched what Denise from the diner had said. A coincidence, or maybe not. Kinney tracked down the registration records for all blue Ford pickups in the county. He got 73 names. He started crossing them off one by one. Cottle's name sat at number 58. The address listed was a post office box near the docks. No phone number. They found him 2 days later working at a small repair shed near the water. He looked calm, polite, unremarkable. He told Kinney he'd been home that night. "Didn't leave after 11, he said. "I got a roommate who can tell you that." The roommate, a fisherman named Earl Dent, confirmed it half-heartedly, but enough. They shook hands and left. The next morning, Cottle skipped town for a few weeks, working a boat out of Booth Bay. No one thought to check the timing. By the time they did, the trail had gone cold. Forensic work in 1981 was basic. The lab processed the cigarette for prints, none clear. They tested the saliva stain for blood type, type O, male. That ruled out the victim but matched nearly half the male population. Useless at the time. The report went into the folder and stayed there. Kinney kept a note pinned above his desk. "Cigarette near shoes, unknown male." He told colleagues he didn't believe in coincidences, but without more, there was nothing to charge. The case lingered. Leads faded. Witnesses moved away. Weeks turned to months. Lisa's name slowly slipped from headlines. By fall, Back Cove returned to normal. Joggers ran the trail again, though they never stopped near the spot where the reeds grew thicker. Some looked away when they passed it. Others left flowers on the guardrail above. The only new clue that surfaced that year came from a longshoreman who claimed he'd heard a drunk brag about knowing what happened to the girl. Police interviewed him. The story collapsed under questions. Another dead end. Kinney retired 5 years later, still carrying her photo in his notebook. He told his replacement to keep the file close. "Something in there," he said. "Something we missed." He didn't know how right he was. The cigarette, that small, almost forgotten scrap of evidence, remained sealed in its paper envelope. It sat in an evidence box marked Cold Cases 1000, 985 on a metal shelf in a storage room with flickering fluorescent lights. The ink faded to brown, but the seal never broke. Decades later, when a young detective opened that same box under the hum of a new LED light, the label was still legible. Item 12. Marlboro filter, wet. That's how the story of a forgotten object became the key to everything that followed. The discovery at Back Cove began as tragedy. It ended, 44 years later, as proof. By Sunday afternoon, the words "Back Cove murder" were everywhere in Portland. The radio anchors repeated them every hour. The evening news opened with live shots from the trail, yellow tape flapping against the grass. It was a small city then, close enough that everyone knew someone who worked the docks or the diners. Fear didn't arrive all at once, it seeped in quietly. By Monday, it was part of the air. That morning, volunteers gathered near the shoreline for a second search. Detectives wanted to cover every yard of the path in case the killer had dropped something. The fog had cleared, leaving only the smell of mud and gasoline from the small boats that still moved in and out of the cove. Men in rubber boots walked shoulder to shoulder, poking the ground with sticks. Women from nearby churches brought coffee and sandwiches. Police dogs sniffed the reeds. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of a bell buoy from the bay. Detective Robert Kinney stood by his unmarked car with a thermos balanced on the hood, watching the lines move slowly across the waterline. He'd been in homicide for a decade but had never seen so many volunteers at a crime scene. Portland wasn't used to this kind of fear. Reporters circled like gulls, waiting for any scrap of information. The Portland Press-Herald printed a front-page headline that morning. "Young woman found dead near Back Cove. Police seek clues in late-night attack." The article ran next to a grainy photo of the scene, cropped to show only the police tape and Kinney's silhouette against the fog. Beneath it, a smaller box carried a quote from the commissioner. "We believe this was an isolated act." No one believed that. At City Hall, phones rang nonstop. Parents demanded curfews. Neighborhood groups asked for more patrols. The mayor met with the police chief behind closed doors. Later, a press release called the crime tragic but solvable. It did little to calm anyone. The diner closed for 2 days, out of respect. Someone taped a photo of Lisa to the front door, a snapshot of her laughing, hair blowing sideways in the wind. Customers left flowers on the sidewalk beneath it. When the doors reopened, every booth felt quieter. The waitresses talked in whispers. They said the man in the corner booth, the one who smoked Marlboros and watched the window, hadn't come back. That detail spread fast. By Tuesday, the police tip line was full of calls about strangers who smoked, men who drove pickups, neighbors who seemed off. Most tips led nowhere. Some were plain hysteria. Kinney knew panic when he saw it, but he also knew panic could shake loose something real. He told his team to listen to everything, even the strange ones. "You never know which story carries the grain of truth," he said. One call came from a ferry worker named Bill Knox. He said that on the night of July 10th, he'd been locking the terminal when he noticed a pickup parked near the service road. Older Ford, blue or green. Guy inside was smoking, window half down. Didn't think much of it until I heard about the girl. Kinney logged it in the report. Matches previous sighting. Truck, possible link. Another came from a barmaid at the Wharf Tavern. She said a fisherman named Ray used to sit at her counter after shifts, always with a smoke, always quiet. She hadn't seen him since the night of the murder. 2 notes, same man, same truck, still not enough. That week, the department set up a mobile command post near Back Cove. Uniformed officers patrolled the trail after dark. Posters went up with Lisa's photo, "Help solve this crime." Reward money came in from local businesses, small bills, and checks stacked in a coffee tin. The search widened. Dive teams scanned the water for the missing sketchbook. Nothing surfaced. By the end of the week, people in Portland stopped walking alone at night. Restaurants closed early. The paper called it the Summer of Locks. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts. Rumors filled the vacuum facts left behind. Some said a drifter had done it. Others swore it was a jealous boyfriend. One theory claimed a sailor from out of state had followed her home. Each rumor built its own momentum, fueled by fear and repetition. On Friday, the church in Yarmouth held a vigil. Over 200 people attended, candles flickering against the stained glass. Her sister, Emily, stood near the front, silent. Reporters took photos but didn't ask questions. Detective Kinney watched from the back pew. He didn't speak either. He just studied the faces, trying to see who looked uncomfortable, who couldn't meet his eyes. He'd learned that guilt sometimes hides in plain sight. That same night, the police received a tip from a man who claimed he'd seen Lisa arguing with someone near the pier earlier that week. He couldn't remember the man's name, only that he had a scar on his hand and smelled of salt and tobacco. It was a thin lead, but Kinney sent a patrol to check every fisherman's shack along the waterfront. They found no one matching that description. Still, something about the salt and tobacco line stayed with him. He circled it twice in his notes. Saturday morning brought a break, or what looked like one. A pair of teenagers exploring near the cove found a torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch. It was dark wool, almost black. Lab tests later confirmed it wasn't Lisa's clothing. It belonged to a heavy coat, possibly a pea coat. Investigators thought it might have come from the suspect during the struggle. They sealed it in a plastic bag, labeled it, and sent it to the state lab in Augusta. Weeks later, the report came back. Fiber consistent with commercial overcoat. No unique identifiers. Another dead end. The search slowly wound down. The patrols thinned. Reporters moved on to new stories. The city exhaled, but not with relief, with fatigue. Fear had turned into something quieter. Resignation. Back Cove returned to its old rhythm. Joggers ran again, though they stayed closer to the road. The diner reopened fully. Customers sat where they always had, but their eyes lingered on the door. Detective Kinney refused to let the file close. He worked it between other cases, sometimes late at night when the squad room was empty. He'd spread photos across his desk, connecting red strings between points on a map. He kept a small piece of evidence pinned above his phone. The cigarette envelope, its paper turning yellow around the edges. He didn't know why he fixated on it. He just had a feeling. In interviews, he told anyone who'd listen that the killer wasn't a stranger. "This is local," he said. "Someone who knows the wharf, knows the timing, knew how quiet that walk would be." No one disagreed, but no one had proof. By autumn, the city's fear had settled into memory. The posters came down. The hotline went silent. The case turned from active to open, a bureaucratic shift that meant the same thing: no leads, no progress. But every detective in Portland still remembered that summer by one detail: the fog, the quiet, and the sight of a young woman's shoes placed side by side near the waterline, as if she'd stepped out of them willingly. That image stayed in their minds long after the rest of the evidence blurred. And for years, whenever the wind came in off the bay, carrying the smell of salt and smoke, some of them swore they could still see the glow of a single cigarette burning in the dark, the last light of a night that refused to die. By autumn of 1981, Portland was back to routine, at least on the surface. The fishermen rose before dawn, the diners opened, the ferries came and went, but the city had changed. Fear had left fingerprints that didn't fade. The Back Cove murder still led every conversation at the bars and break rooms along the waterfront. Everyone had a theory. The dock workers blamed drifters who came through the marina. The drifters blamed the dock workers. The locals whispered that the police knew more than they were saying. Detective Robert Kinney spent his days chasing stories that began with "I heard" and ended with nothing. One caller said she'd seen Lisa in a car near 4th Street 2 nights before her death. Another swore a man with a scar on his cheek had been watching women leave the diner that week. Both accounts fell apart under questioning. Still, Kinney checked them all. He followed the truck lead through every registry listing in the county. 73 blue Fords. He crossed off each one, except 2. Both belonged to dock workers with late-night shifts. Both denied being near Back Cove. Both passed polygraphs. When he finally reached the last name on the list, Raymond Cottle, the trail went soft. Cottle was out of town, working boats off Booth Bay. By the time he returned, his lawyer answered all questions. Kinney never forgot that name. As weeks turned into months, the evidence box filled, but the case thinned. Each new report added more weight without bringing clarity. The cigarette with type O saliva, the torn wool fiber, the missing sketchbook, 3 threads that refused to weave together. Winter came early that year. The cove froze at the edges. Portland buried itself under snow, and talk of the murder turned quieter, like something people didn't want to disturb. By spring of 1982, the case file had a new label: open, inactive. Still, it never went cold in the hearts of the people who'd known her. In Yarmouth, Lisa's parents hosted a small memorial every July 10th. Her sister Emily brought flowers and her old art portfolio. They laid one sketch out on the table each year, different every time. Her father called it keeping her work in the light. In the diner, Leo the cook hung her photo on the wall behind the counter. For years afterward, customers would glance at it without realizing who she was. Every so often, someone new would come forward, claiming to remember something. A bar patron, a night guard, a man who said he saw headlights parked near the service road around midnight. Each tip sent the detectives spinning again, hoping the next call would be the one. It never was. In 1986, a fisherman pulled a rusted bicycle frame from Back Cove. Detectives thought it might connect somehow. It didn't. In 1991, an anonymous letter arrived at the department. It read, "You already talked to him once. He worked at the docks. He smoked Marlboros." No signature, no fingerprints. Just that single clue. Kinney was retired by then, living outside the city. When a younger detective called him about the letter, he told them to check the Cottle file. "That's the one you want," he said. "Blue truck, cigarettes, late shift. Don't let it go." But they did. Cottle had moved south to New Hampshire. His record was clean. He married, had kids, opened a small marine repair shop. His life looked ordinary. Without DNA, the evidence meant nothing. By the late 90s, the Back Cove case had become a story people told newcomers, half cautionary tale, half local myth. The girl with the sketchbook, the shoes by the water. The cigarette that never told its story. Detectives came and went. Each opened the box, read the notes, then closed it again. Emily Garland wrote letters to every police chief. She asked the same question every time. "Can you test it again?" The answer was always the same: not yet. Then came 2023. A new generation of detectives joined the Portland Cold Case Unit. Technology had caught up to time. Detective Sarah Connors was 29 when she first opened the Garland file. She'd been 6 months old when Lisa died. She spread the evidence across her desk: photos, reports, envelopes yellowed with age. One item drew her attention immediately. Item 12, Marlboro filter, wet. She took it to the evidence lab. The technician frowned. 40 years old. If there's anything left, it's a miracle. They tested it anyway. What came back was faint, fragmented, but enough. Partial DNA, male. Connors sent the profile to the national database. No match. So, she turned to genealogy. For months, she worked with a private genetic analyst in Virginia. They compared the unknown DNA to open-source genealogy databases, searching for distant relatives. Slowly, patterns emerged, a web of family connections stretching through New England. The line narrowed to a cluster of surnames. One matched an old police interview. Cottle. The analyst called her one morning in April 2025. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "We got a hit. It's a strong familial match, son of Raymond Cottle." Raymond himself had died in 2006, but his son, Michael, now 57, still lived in southern Maine. He drove the same route his father once did, even smoked the same brand. Detectives retrieved a coffee cup from a roadside diner where he stopped daily. DNA from the rim matched the saliva from the 44-year-old cigarette filter. The odds of error, less than 1 in a trillion. They arrested him at his home 2 days later. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, worked odd jobs repairing boats. None had ever heard him speak of Portland. When confronted with the evidence, he didn't deny it. He only asked one question. "Did my dad ever tell you why?" The truth came out slowly. Raymond Cottle, the fisherman from the diner, had been angry that summer facing layoffs, drinking heavily, nursing grudges against anyone who reminded him of what he'd lost. He'd made advances toward Lisa more than once, subtle but unwelcome. She'd brushed him off, politely at first, then firmly. Witnesses remembered tension between them. He'd told friends she thought she was too good for this town. That night, after leaving the Wharf Tavern, he followed her from the diner, cigarette glowing in the dark cab of his truck. He stopped when she stopped, waited when she waited. When she turned onto the path by the cove, he got out. The argument lasted less than a minute, the violence less than 30 seconds. He left her where she fell, took her sketchbook, and drove away. No one saw him again that night. His son later found the sketchbook among his father's belongings after his death, tucked in a trunk with fishing gear and old photographs. He hadn't known what it was. Years later, when he left it on the church steps, he said it was a way to let it go. That's how the case closed, through science, confession, and a quiet act of guilt. In July 2025, the Portland Police Department held a press conference. Detective Connors stood beside Emily Garland, now in her 60s, holding a framed sketch of the harbor her sister had drawn long ago. "After 44 years, the chief said, Lisa Garland's killer has been identified. Justice delayed, but not denied." The crowd clapped. Some cried. But Emily didn't call it closure. "Closure means forgetting," she told reporters. "I'll never forget her. I just finally know." Today, the path along Back Cove is paved and well lit. Joggers pass the same bend every morning where the reeds grow high. There's a small plaque near the waterline now, in memory of Lisa Garland. 1,961,981. Her light still shines on this shore. Beneath it, every year, someone leaves a jar of paintbrushes. No one knows who. Maybe Emily. Maybe one of Lisa's old classmates. Or maybe it's just Portland itself remembering the summer when fear took hold and hope refused to die. Because even after 4 decades, one truth endures. A single clue, saved by accident, can speak louder than a lifetime of silence. And when it finally does, it doesn't just solve a case. It changes a city. It started, as so many cold case miracles do, with one question: could there still be DNA left? Detective Sarah Connors wasn't expecting a miracle. She just wanted to try. The envelope marked Item 12 Marlboro filter, wet, had sat in storage since 1981. The paper had gone brittle. The seal, somehow, still held. She handed it to the state lab in Augusta with a note that read simply, "Please prioritize if viable." Weeks passed. Then came the call. "Sarah," the technician said, "you won't believe this. We got a partial male profile." That was enough. The sample went to Verigen Analytics in Virginia, one of the few labs in the country capable of building a genetic genealogy tree from a fragment that old. They extracted less than 1/1000th of a gram of material, sequenced it, and uploaded the genetic markers to open-source databases used by people tracing ancestry. 3 weeks later, the computer spat out a name cluster. The closest relative was a woman in New Hampshire who'd uploaded her DNA to find Irish cousins. She turned out to be a second cousin to a man named Michael Cottle. That name hit like an echo through time. Cottle, the same surname that had haunted the old case file, underlined twice by Detective Robert Kinney 44 years earlier. Sarah pulled the original notes. Blue pickup, Marlboro smoker, docks. Every detail matched the profile of Raymond Cottle, long deceased. The lab's analysis confirmed what instinct already knew. The DNA on the cigarette belonged to his son, Michael, whose profile matched by more than 99.99%. They obtained a discarded coffee cup from a diner in Kittery. It was enough to seal it. When detectives knocked on Michael Cottle's door, he didn't resist. He looked at the warrant, sighed once, and said, "It's about her, isn't it?" At the station, he confessed quietly. His father, Raymond, had told him the truth on his deathbed. That he'd lost his temper that night by the cove. That he'd been drunk. That it wasn't supposed to happen. Michael had found the old sketchbook years later in his father's attic, water-damaged, edges curled. He didn't understand its weight until he saw Lisa Garland's face in a true crime article. Guilt had lived in that house ever since. When the news broke, Portland froze. 44 years of silence cracked open in a single afternoon. Reporters filled Commercial Street again, the same stretch Lisa had walked her last night alive. Emily Garland stood in front of cameras and said, "For the first time in my life, I can breathe." The police chief called it justice by persistence. The lab called it a triumph of preservation, but the people of Portland just called it finally. The case closed that summer. The evidence box was resealed this time with a final tag, "Solved, 2025. On the trail at Back Cove, there's no tape, no sirens, no chaos now, only the sound of water and wind. Every July 10th, someone leaves a single Marlboro cigarette beside the memorial plaque. Unlit, upright. A quiet symbol of what was lost and what was finally found.